Welcome to The Explainer. I'm so glad you're joining us today because we are going on a bit of a forensic investigation. We're going to unpack what is arguably the most confusing market crash in history. We're looking at July 2026, when hundreds of billions of dollars in AI spending suddenly just sent absolute shockwaves through the markets. Today, we're going to strictly examine the numbers, the clever accounting tricks, and the secret financial loops to figure out exactly why the AI bubble popped. Okay, so let's just dive right into this central paradox. Back on July 23rd, 2026, the American tech market started taking a massive nosedive. And honestly, it was entirely baffling to most people. Usually, right, stocks crash when companies fail, or they report massive losses, or growth hits a wall. But the companies at the center of this specific crash, they were doing the exact opposite. They were reporting their highest quarterly profits literally ever. And yet, seemingly out of absolutely nowhere, their stock prices just plummeted. I want you to think about the staggeringly huge number, $300 billion. Google lost $300 billion in market cap in a single day. Amazon lost $120 billion. Nvidia lost $80 billion. And this is all despite the fact that Google had just reported massive cash generation from its actual business operations. This right here sets up our financial crime scene. The market completely panicked because investors suddenly realized that the AI boom might be cracking under the immense weight of its own rising costs. So to understand why, we need to uncover 4 specific smoking guns. Let's get right into smoking gun number 1, the cash flow paradox. To make sense of this paradox, we really need to look at how cash actually moves behind the scenes at these tech giants. Look past those flashy headlines talking about record revenue. So let's quickly define free cash flow, because understanding this simple math is absolutely crucial. Imagine a local coffee shop makes, say, $500 million selling coffee, but then they decide to spend $700 million building a bunch of shiny new outlets. The shop is technically highly profitable in its daily operations, sure, but its actual bank account went down by $200 million. That is free cash flow. It's just the cash generated from running the business minus the cash spent on building things. Now, let's apply that exact same coffee shop math to Google's parent company, Alphabet. On paper, they reported their highest quarterly profit ever. Their day-to-day operations generated a massive $39 billion in cash. That's a 41% increase year over year. But at the exact same time, they also spent an eye-watering $44.9 billion on AI infrastructure. So that massive, beautiful mountain of cash they generated, it was entirely wiped out by their AI spending. The math here is pretty brutal. $39 billion minus $44.9 billion leaves Alphabet in the hole with negative $5.9 billion. This was Google's first recorded negative free cash flow since 2004. And in total, Alphabet had committed $811 billion in signed future purchases. For years, massive spending signaled market confidence. It meant growth. But on July 23rd, the sheer scale of this negative cash flow finally caused the market to snap. JP Morgan actually ran the math on this whole situation, and it beautifully illustrates exactly why this level of spending is so terrifying. Basically, if you're investing in something highly risky, you want at least a 10% return. Based on the industry's massive investments, AI needs to make $650 billion every single year just to justify the cost. But if you combine the generous revenue estimates for OpenAI, Anthropic, and Gemini, they only make about $97 billion collectively. And by the way, they do that while operating at a $20 to $30 billion loss. The gap between expectation and reality is absolutely massive. So how on earth do loss-making companies sign trillion-dollar infrastructure deals when they don't make nearly enough money? Well, that brings us to smoking gun number 2, circular financing. So how do they do it? Through a really fascinating strategy happening entirely in the shadows. We need to understand this concept called vendor financing. Essentially, this is when a company loans out money or provides heavy financial guarantees to its own customers, basically to ensure its own products get bought. Let me give you a great analogy for this. Imagine a guy named Dave who makes this gorgeous $12,000 commercial espresso machine. 100 new cafes desperately want it, but they have absolutely no money. So Dave gets a little creative. He tells them, hey, take the machine for just $1,000 up front and pay me the remaining $11,000 when you finally turn a profit. Boom. Overnight, Dave books $1.2 million in revenue and looks like an absolute business genius. But here's the catch. Dave hasn't actually sold 100 machines. He's just placed 100 bets on unproven cafes.
If those cafes don't sell enough coffee, they fail, the loans default, and Dave's shiny record revenue completely disappears.
Now I want you to scale Dave up by 1,000,000 times. Let's walk through how big tech is locked in this exact type of circular financing loop. Step 1, NVIDIA is in talks to provide massive financing guarantees. Step 2, a subsidiary of SoftBank built a $500 billion data center. Step 3, OpenAI leases that computing capacity using that NVIDIA-backed financing to purchase, you guessed it, NVIDIA chips. And finally, step 4, NVIDIA recognizes this as revenue and then uses that to provide guarantees for even more projects. It's wild. NVIDIA is acting as the supplier, the investor, and the debt guarantor all at the exact same time. When you look at this stark contrast in these numbers, the immense danger of this loop just becomes so obvious. NVIDIA's potential exposure to just OpenAI alone could reach $600 billion through financing guarantees and chip procurement deals. Yet NVIDIA's own annual revenue is just $216 billion. Think about that. Their exposure to one single cash-burning company vastly outweighs the money they actually bring in over a whole year. If the buyer can't pay with those unproven future profits, the whole house of cards just collapses.
Let's move on to smoking gun number 3, the accounting illusion.
You might be wondering, if costs are really this astronomical, how are these companies reporting such incredibly high profits right now? Well, legendary investor Michael Burry spotted this, and it all boils down to a very simple division problem. When a company buys equipment, they don't count the entire cost in one year. They spread it out over the equipment's useful life. So if you buy $30 billion of AI servers and tell your accountant they'll last 3 years, you reported $10 billion expense each year. But if you just casually declare those exact same servers will magically last 6 years instead, suddenly your annual expense drops to $5 billion. For the exact same servers, your reported profit artificially jumps up by $5 billion a year on paper.
The really shocking reality here is that all the major players are using this exact accounting trick. From 2020 to 2025, Meta increased its equipment useful life from 3 to 5.5 years. Google stretched theirs from 3 to 6 years. Oracle and Microsoft, they've done the exact same thing. It literally stops being an engineering calculation and just becomes an accounting trick to artificially boost reported profits by billions of dollars every single year. I mean, only time will tell if these servers actually last that long. And that leads us right into smoking gun number 4, shell companies and shadow debt. For this final piece of the puzzle, we have to ask a really basic question. This whole AI data center build-out is priced at over $3 to $5 trillion. Nobody has $5 trillion in cash sitting around. So where's this money actually coming from? The answer? It's being borrowed using shell companies. Let's look at Meta as an example. They're building a giant data center costing $29 billion. But Meta didn't borrow $29 billion. Instead, a brand new shell company called Binnett Investor LLC was created out of thin air. That shell company borrowed $27.3 billion from bond investors. Astonishingly, the shell company actually owns the data center, and Meta is merely a tenant paying rent. Why do it this way? Because Meta gets its massive data center without $27 billion of debt sitting on its own balance sheet, which would absolutely terrify its shareholders. When you put it all together, this adds up to a pretty alarming reality. Using these sneaky structures, companies like Meta, Alphabet, Amazon, Microsoft, and Oracle collectively carry $1.65 trillion in AI-related shadow debt. All of this borrowing is built on the massive assumption that these companies will eventually turn a huge profit from these data centers to pay back those bond investors. Okay, so let's connect all of these smoking guns back to the market panic. On July 23, 2026, the confusing crash kicks off. Investors are suddenly waking up to the negative free cash flow and this massive mountain of shadow debt. Then, just days later, on July 27th, the price of insurance on NVIDIA's debt, these are known as credit default swaps, recorded its biggest intraday jump ever. Banks and lenders were suddenly panic buying insurance just in case NVIDIA's whole circular financing loop collapsed. As the saying goes, the stock market tells you what people hope for, but the insurance market, that tells you what they fear. So it's time for the verdict, revolution, or market speculation. Let's bring all this evidence together, the negative cash flow, the circular financing, the clever depreciation math, and that trillion-dollar shadow debt. Are we witnessing a permanent crash? Or is this just a temporary bump on the road to a technological revolution? Well, we have to face a harsh reality. OpenAI has signed roughly $1.4 trillion in infrastructure commitments, but their annual revenue is only a fraction of that. In fact, Sam Altman himself has publicly admitted that they lose money even on their super expensive $200 Pro subscriptions.
The absolute leaders of this revolution have not yet solved the basic profit problem of the very technology they're selling.
We are absolutely living through a fascinating historical parallel right now. Think back to the dot-com boom of the late 1990s. Expectations grew way faster than reality. Massive investments were made, the profits failed to materialize fast enough, and the market crashed hard. Yet, the internet itself still fundamentally changed the world over the next decade. AI is creating real products, and it's generating real revenue. A financial bubble popping doesn't mean the technology is fake. It just means the current price tags and debt levels got way, way ahead of reality.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to ponder. If token costs continue to drop dramatically and enterprises embed AI into literally every operation, then these trillion-dollar bets might just go down as the greatest investments in human history. But if those profits don't arrive in time to pay off $1.65 trillion in shadow debt, then the crash of July 2026 was just the beginning, and it will ripple through all of our portfolios. Can these legendary tech companies build the future fast enough to outrun their own accounting? That is the ultimate question. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep your eyes on the numbers.